welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on wherever you are. Thanks for joining us today for this session of the Section 3 office hours. So the office hours are really meant to enhance the 3-day training sessions that were offered in 2021. We did 25 sessions, all remotely, of course, due to COVID, but there were 25 different sessions and there were a lot of questions coming in. And so HUD wanted to provide an opportunity for participants who attended those sessions other chances to ask more questions. And so today is the last of the 6 of the office hours that are being provided. If for some reason you didn't attend one of these initial training sessions, we really encourage you to review the course material. It is now uploaded on the HUD Exchange, and you can get to that from the Section 3 page. There's also upcoming PHA sessions that are coming in May. So these are exactly the same sessions as what was trained in 2021. So if you already went to that, do not register again. But if you have colleagues that didn't have an opportunity to go, we're doing it May 17th and 18th, May 24th and 25th, and June 7th and 8th. And the registration is now open for that on the HUD Exchange as well. So let your colleagues know about that. They are only 2 days because we took out all of the information that's not relevant to PHA. So if you think, oh, well, I went to a 3-day and this is only 2-day, I should go to this one. It is exactly the same. So please don't go to that again. And so for today, we don't really have a set agenda. We're just here to answer your Section 3 questions, and we can do that either in writing or verbally. So like Medora just said, if you want to ask us a question verbally, go into that chat box and type in to the host that you would like to ask a question, and then Medora will unmute you and you can go ahead and ask that, or you can go ahead and type in the Q&A box. So while you're starting to type your questions, we should probably introduce ourselves. Like I said, I'm Chris Richmond. I'm with ICF. I've been with ICF for over 22 years now, hard to believe. I work on a lot of different housing programs. Also, I'm a lead-based paint expert, and I was one of the trainers for Section 3. So Tiara, are you able to come on and say hello to everybody?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiara, and I've been with ICF for just over 1.5 years. I still feel like I'm a newbie. I work on the Section 3 team with Chris and Les, and then I also do a lot of fair housing work. So thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Tiara, for being here. Tiara is going to be typing answers as we go along today, so you may not see her, but she's definitely a very important part of our day this afternoon. And Les, my other colleague who's with me today, Les Warner, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Les Warner. Been with ICF for 15 years and working on Section 3 and CDBG and home and led with Chris and URA. But prior to joining ICF, I worked at the state level. I headed up a state's housing community development programs, was there for 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Les. We also wanted to give you a little update on some of the resources. If you came to a training earlier in the year, you might have seen coming soon next to some of these things. So we did want to give you an update on a couple things. So the guidebook is now available. So let me see if I can find my little pointer here. I always like to use that when I'm training. The e-guidebook is now available on the HUD Exchange. So go to that Section 3 page and it's right there. You can click on that and work through the guidebook. Our FAQs also on the HUD Exchange, those after every single training session that was done, we would cull through the questions that came in, see if there was any new frequently asked questions that should be added. So if you hadn't looked at those in a long time, go back and check those out. And then we are still waiting on the public housing CPD notice. Or the PIH notice, I'm sorry, we come from PIH. So there is a home notice and a block grant notice, but the public housing one should be coming in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes and ears open. I'm assuming something would either come out from the HUD Exchange or from HUD.gov about that when that's available. So Les, anything else you want to add about resources before we go into questions?
No, I think you covered it really well.
Great. Okay. So let's, Medora, do we have anybody in the chat who wants to ask any questions?
Not just yet, but I will let you know.
Okay.
Chris, we do have a few questions in the Q&A that you may want to get started with. One is a question about how with the old rule, you used to track new hires, and now with the final rule, you're tracking labor hours. And someone asked, how do we count hours? So if you could go into kind of the change and how we now count those hours.
Sure. Les, you want to take that on? Or?
Sure. So really important, if you've worked with Section 3 under the old rule and haven't taken the training, it will be really important to do that, in that it's really changed. The old rule was counting, we were looking at contracts, and we were also looking at new hires. And so this rule has really changed in that it is now looking at overall workforce or labor force, and then counting workers that qualify. So that could be new hires, or and also the subs that are part of this, but it also would be ongoing workers. So our goals here, thank you, Chris, are to have 25% of that overall workforce, the labor hours that are completed for that project. And for PHAs, this is per fiscal year. So we need to have those workers qualifying as a Section 3 worker. So what we'll need to be able to do, so what we're going to be collecting from each of our projects is the total labor hours that are worked. And so that would be, let's say we have a contractor and perhaps they have a subcontractor or two. We'd need their total labor hours for this particular project or funding, since it's PHAs, but also you might have your own internal staff that are being charged off to this same project. And so we would have to incorporate those labor hours also. And so we're tracking, what are my total labor hours for this? Internally, we'd be looking at, how are you charging that person's time? Externally, for that contractor, usually we're going to have an estimate of what the hours would be at the beginning of that contract, but then would be tracking hours completed as part of not only your Section 3 reporting, but I would think as they are drawing down funding, we would be asking for that. And typically, the contractor would be responsible for collecting from the subcontractor what their labor hours were. So we need to have total labor hours for the project, and then for the workforce that's being charged off for those labor hours, needing to be able to identify which of these workers qualifies as a Section 3 worker, and then it's the subset of the Section 3 workers. Some of those folks, we hope, will qualify as targeted Section 3 workers. So that's the data that we need to be able to collect to be able to report on a fiscal year basis for the PHA funding. That will be reported into this new portal that's being created. And the sort of the backup to this is that and so these are the quantitative benchmarks, but there also are qualitative benchmarks. So essentially, you can still be in safe harbor or be in compliance if you fail to meet the 25 and 5%, if you're able to show that you completed those qualitative efforts, which really are outreach, trying to make sure when there's an opportunity that those linkages have been created. for those of you that worked under the old Section 3 rule, this is something that was part of the old rule, and so our goal is to meet those quantitative benchmarks, the 25 and 5%, but you kind of want that backup methodology if we're going to ask everyone to also do the qualitative efforts. So when there are jobs and training opportunities, when there are contracting opportunities, we want to try to link in and work towards the goals of meeting these benchmarks. But those qualitative efforts documented will be sort of your backup if you fail to meet the benchmarks. Chris, you want to add to that?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Thank you. We had another question come in asking about small PHAs and what type of reporting they had to do. So for small PHAs, which is if you qualify, it's less than 250 units, then you don't have to be tracking labor hours. You only need to do qualitative reporting, which is in the regulations, they provide a long list of possible options. There's also an other that you can check in your reporting for other qualitative efforts. It might be maybe you're hoping to do some marketing of positions that are available. Maybe you're working with the labor force, workforce in the area to do training for low-income people to be able to learn how to do certain types of rehab or construction skills. You could be doing job fairs. There's all sorts of qualitative efforts. So if you are a small PHA, you're not required to track those labor hours. You would only need to do qualitative. But I would check with your HUD office, make sure that you do truly qualify as a small PHA, because you don't want to be in a situation where you haven't been tracking that when you might have been if the numbers were different. So check with that. Medora, anybody come in the chat yet? So do they want to ask a question?
Yep, we have Karen Kopp, who is going to be unmuted now.
Okay, thank you.
Karen? Karen, you've been unmuted. You can ask your question now. Seems like Karen may be having some audio issues, so I can read out the question as well. Karen asked, is the Section 3 tied to the Davis-Bacon Act?
Chris, do you want to do this or do you want me to?
You can talk about that, about Davis-Bacon.
Okay, so they're not tied to each other, but because you are doing some similar, collecting some similar information, it may be helpful for you. So we know under Section 3 that we're having to look at total labor hours for the project, and then also qualifying workers. So with Davis-Bacon, you're going to have certified payrolls that are being provided for this project. And so that gives you quite a bit of information. Let's see, I'm going to go to day 2 and go to slide 37, see what that gets us. All right, so when we're certifying a Section 3 worker, we're moving here.
Yeah, tell me which slide number it is.
37?
For day 2?
Yeah.
That's not what's showing up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but this is what this is good. So if when we're certifying a Section 3 worker, we have a number of ways to be able to do this. So we could do a self-certification, be able to show that they've been found eligible based on another means testing on this. But if you look at item number 5 here, the employer is able to certify that worker. I'm sorry, number 4 is certifying based on that worker's income. So for a Davis-Bacon project, we will know what we've got certified payroll. We will have for each of the workers, we're going to know what their pay rate is. So I could, for a Davis-Bacon project on the front end, being identifying within the workforce, okay, I've got, 12 workers that are Section 3 qualifying workers that could be provided by the employer based on that worker's income. And one key difference here is that this is based on for Section 3, on the individual worker's income, as opposed to we typically are looking at, a family or a household. So because they have set this income limit as an individual income limit, we can take the employer based on the wage rate that they are being paid, annualize that and determine, yes, this person is income eligible. They can be qualified as a Section 3 worker. So we would know right up front, okay, we've got a certain number of Section 3 workers. We could do the same thing with targeted Section 3 workers and then be able to we could be asking the employer, the contractor, to be able to provide us a running calculation for those employees, but we could use our Davis-Bacon certified payrolls to be able to double check that. And I think in some of the earlier office hours, we've had conversations with folks about thinking in terms of whose responsibility will this be? You may well be able to say to the contractor, okay, you're going to be providing us under Davis-Bacon, you're going to be providing us certified payrolls, these items. You might also require them to provide you to identify upfront qualifying workers and provide then a running total of total labor hours that were worked for the project, and then also in these qualifying categories. You might, as the PHA, in overseeing this, then maybe double check what's being reported using those certified payrolls that you're receiving. You could kind of double check total labor hours overall. You could double check what an individual worker's rate is for workers that have been certified by that contractor. So Davis-Bacon doesn't kind of eliminate having to do legwork on Section 3, but it does give you some documentation, particularly to kind of double check on what you're getting is correct.
So somebody was asking about a maintenance staff person, and do we need to count their hours? So for PHA, so with the exception of professional service labor hours, so if you have an accountant or an attorney, we consider those professional service labor hours. Section 3 applies to all labor hours that are billed to a project or a contract funded with public housing financial assistance, as long as that public housing financial assistance for the project is funded with development assistance, operations and management assistance, or development, modernization, management assistance, or mixed finance development. So we are including, as long as it's coming from one of those funding areas, we are including the labor hours of our maintenance staff. Somebody else also was asking, because we're really in the weeds here today, about Section 3, our targeted Section 3 workers. So I was going to go to that slide because I think it's helpful. First, you have to understand what a Section 3 worker is, because a targeted Section 3 worker is also a Section 3 worker. So here's our slide, if you recall from our training. The Section 3 worker has to meet one of these three categories, either currently or within the past 5 years. So they're either a low income or very low income worker, they're employed by a Section 3 business concern, or they're a youth build participant. So first you have to decide, is this worker a Section 3 worker? If the answer to that is yes, they may also be a targeted Section 3 worker. So then we look at our targeted Section 3 worker, and for public housing assistance, a targeted Section 3 worker is either someone who's employed by a Section 3 business concern or is a resident of public housing or Section 3 or Section 8 assistance, or a resident of another public housing project, or a youth build participant. So targeted Section 3 workers are always Section 3 workers, but not all Section 3 workers are targeted Section 3 workers. I was trying to see if we had that slide that has the circles on it to see if I show that. Yeah, here we go. So we have all of our workers, we have our Section 3 workers, and a subset of those Section 3 workers may also be targeted Section 3 workers. So Les, anything you want to add to that or expand on?
No, I think that covered it.
Okay. Medora, is there anybody else on the line that wants to ask a question?
Nobody else is in queue right now.
Okay. All right. We can look at our questions that are coming in here.
Did you want me to give you one, Chris, or?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So someone asked, I was just in the midst of typing the answer. So if a contractor includes a superintendent into the budget of the project funds, their hours would count even though they are not doing any physical work, just overseeing the project.
Friday, we're not here.
Yes.
Can you guys mute? Make sure you mute yourselves because we're getting some feedback.
With that email you sent me?
Medora, do you have the ability to mute the line?
Okay, tomorrow you're not here. You out and about?
You're on mute, Chris.
Myself.
There we go. I can hear you.
Yeah, so if this is public housing, anytime 1 cent is put in, Section 3 is automatically triggered. Okay, so yes, the superintendent, if it's not considered a professional services type of position, then we would be counting those labor hours.
And I would assume that sometimes in those positions, you may have a worker that some of their time is being charged off under one funding source, and some of their time is being charged off to others. So I think at that point would need to be able to then track what hours are being charged off to this, and that would be, those hours are included in the total labor hours for that project. So, we sometimes talk with people about how they're filing a time card that also then identifies individual projects. So that may be important to make sure that that is being handled in that way.
Great, thanks. Tira, is there any other questions that we should be answering?
We're getting a lot of questions about PHAs and reporting. Could you go over the reporting requirements for PHAs, and then specifically if you're a small PHA and you elect to report qualitatively, could you go over that information?
Sure. Let's see. Just saw small.
I'm thinking it's day 3 and slide 31, maybe?
31? Okay. There we go. This is PHAs. Okay, so PHAs, they are creating a new system. It's not ready yet. It should be ready soon. I'm assuming once it's available, there'll be some training on that, on how to use that system. You no longer have to use a system that you were using before, but this new system is going to be coming out, and then your reporting is going to be required 60 days after the end of your first fiscal year end that began last summer, July 1st of 2021. Okay, so and it's 60 days after that. So the first time that the group that's going to have to be reporting will be due 60, so 7, end of August, I think we have there, 60 days after June 30th. So you need to look and find when your fiscal year ends, and then the new reporting period, and then you need to make sure you report 60 days after that, and that'll be in this new system. We have a couple screenshots, but we have not been able to get into the system. But basically, you would go through and try to identify, what funding source was being used, and then what kind of hours are being identified. These are just some screenshots. It's going to change a little bit. It'll tell you whether you met those or not. That's what the X and the check mark are. And then the qualitative efforts is this list. It's called Nature of Agency Efforts, that identifies different qualitative efforts that you are also trying to undertake. And then the small PHA slide, I thought we had it up before. Do you know what slide number?
I couldn't find a reference on that. I'm assuming it might be around 43, but I'm not. Oh, we think it's right after that one.
This one. Here we go. We found it.
Here we go.
Yep. So the small PHA, which is less than 250 units.
Will you try to save my breast sticks? Will you save my breast sticks?
Getting that feedback. Okay, so the qualitative reporting is the same as that nature of agency efforts. So what were you trying to do? Did you do a job fair? Were you providing technical assistance to business concerns? That's what we mean by qualitative reporting. And then you want to work with your HUD office. They're going to tell you what type of qualitative reporting if you're with a small PHA.
And I would mention on that, I think it's important for people to realize that my understanding is that would need to be something you'd have that conversation with your program office in advance, that you to clarify that you qualify, and then also what this plan of action would be on the qualitative reporting. So that would be agreed upon, be in place, and then you would be tracking and reporting only on the qualitative reporting. And I think this is really targeted towards the, recognizing that a small agency may have difficulty in being able to meet benchmarks on this, and so kind of relieving them of that duty with an agreed upon qualitative reporting process. And Chris, I think there was another question here that was sort of related to this. So there was a question. I think actually Tiara's in the midst of answering to them, but I think the question was about, will they be reporting overall, or will it be separately for operating funds, capital funds? And when you look at the screenshots, you will see that for the public housing, you're going to be identifying the funding source on this as you're reporting. So my understanding would be you're going to be breaking that out on, which operating funds, which capital funds that it is that you're reporting on. So my understanding, so on this screen you can see that you're identifying which of these funds you are reporting on. So my understanding would be they're going to be individual to the funding source. And I think we're hoping that as we get this additional guidance that there may be, some better information about that, but certainly looking at what we've been provided on these screenshots for this system being developed, that's how it would appear to us.
Okay, and somebody else had asked, and can you clarify if PHA employees count towards the Section 3 worker labor hours? We've talked about that a little bit already, but the answer to that is yes. If it's being funded with one of these PHA funding sources that do trigger Section 3. And as long as it's not, you don't have to track labor hours for professional hours, and professional hours are like an accountant or an attorney. And like Les had explained earlier, you know, maybe you have some senior staff that only work a certain percentage on this, and you can decide to count 50% of those hours towards that.
Chris, we had someone who typed into the Q&A that said they had a question about labor hours. Milestine Tatum. I don't know if you want to come off the mute and ask your question.
Medora might have to unmute them.
Okay, Medora, the name is Milestine Tatum.
Perfect. Milestine Tatum, I am about to unmute you now.
Hi, thank you. It's Milestine.
Milestine, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. You know what? It was not the correct question. I was looking at your Q&A, and my question didn't have to do about labor hours. But what I'm a little bit confused about, because I take things so literally, I was interpreting one of the questions that I saw that can PHA employees, and I think you mentioned it just now, can PHA employees or are PHA employees to be considered as Section 3 workers, because isn't it based on the tier? Like if they're, I know there's a Section 3 and a target Section 3, and I kind of mix them up sometimes, but I know it had to do if they're low income or very low income, if they're in or part of youth build, or if they're a public housing residence or Section 8. And I know I just mixed the two up, but I'm kind of thinking of myself, being at the position that I'm in. I would not qualify as a Section 3 worker because I'm not the first bullet, the second bullet, or the third for that definition of a Section 3 worker, nor would I for the targeted. So when I saw that question about the maintenance, I thought they were asking, are maintenance employees considered Section 3 workers?
Only if they meet the criteria.
Right, of what you're showing just now. Right.
Yeah.
We've been starting to track employees who are, Section 3. We have some residents who are employees of the housing authority that are, public housing or Section 8, so we know we can start tracking them. We just started our fiscal year on 4/1, so we have, in air quotes, some time. Our fiscal year will end 3/31, and then according to the reporting, we have 60 days out from there. So April, May, so that's like the end of May 31st. We should be submitting the report, which we don't know what that looks like just yet, right, from what you mentioned. So we're all kind of new to this, so we're not quite sure exactly like what we're supposed to be doing. What is it that we should be reporting, out, on. I'll be working closely with our Human Resources Department. I'm the Director of Resident Services. So I do know that what we normally do is anytime there's postings, we send it via emails to residents that we have email addresses for, and put it on our social media platform. We include it in our newsletters as a way of outreach, on our application, and ask if you're a public housing or Section 8 resident. So that's another way that we can kind of flag it. But again, it doesn't mean that they would obviously get the job because they have to be qualified. But we do have those kind of protocols in place as far as the outreach. So I don't know if the reporting would ask something to that effect.
Yeah, it will. It'll ask about qualitative. And Milestine, can I, did you say you just started your new reporting period April 1st of 2022? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so your reports will be due May of 2023.
2020, right, correct.
You have another full year. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Okay.
We just started.
I know you said you had time, but I wanted to make sure you knew you had more than 6 weeks. You have a
Right,
year.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly, which is why I'm on this call to make sure that we,
Good,
as
good.
much as possible, get I's dotted and T's crossed. But this has been
Yeah.
very,
So
thank you. It's a little
Oh,
confusing
sure.
sometimes.
I also want to point out too, we had, it was one of the first slides we pulled up, that's HCD, PHA. So when we were talking about the benchmarks, you know, the goal is to try to get this 25%, okay? But it's best efforts.
Mhm.
HUD is not going to come in and take your money away if you haven't reached that. But what you want to be collecting, like you said you were doing, are those qualitative efforts. What are those extra efforts that you're doing? So if you haven't met this benchmark of the 25% of the labor hours being Section 3 workers and 5% being targeted Section 3 workers, only then are you required to report on the qualitative efforts. So it's good that you're collecting this, because who knows when you do reporting whether you've been able to meet that or not. You want to try to track it, but if you haven't met it, then you would have to report on those qualitative efforts.
So is the denominator for all labor hours is, I think we're about maybe 130, 135 employees. So we're counting all of the employees of the PHA as the denominator, and the numerator will be those that should meet that benchmark of the 25%, or either the 5, right? That are either Section 3 or targeted Section 3.
Yeah, and then you have your total labor hours that includes everybody.
Right. Okay. Thank you. You can move me back.
one thing that I'll just mention on this, and Chris, if we can go back to the slide about qualifying Section 3 workers that we just were at and move to this. The thing is that we can look to when they were hired. And so we have a 5-year look back. Currently, we can only go back to the effective date of the regulation. So you may have, as you have, tried to hire residents, if they were meeting this criteria at the point that they were hired, and you can look back to November 30th of 2020, you could have a current employee who their current salary wouldn't qualify them as being low or very low income, but they might have at the time that they were hired. And so that might expand, who is going to be able to qualify. And that kind of ties with the big change in this rule, is that we're trying to reward essentially for hiring qualifying workers, that we can, take credit for them towards our Section 3 goals for up to a 5-year period. So that might be a resource. And when we look at targeted Section 3 workers, I think, I don't know if Chris, if you can flip to that slide, but I'm thinking that we also have that same, yeah. So, yeah. So when we look at, they currently fit, or as documented with them in the past 5 years. So if you had someone who was a resident at the time they were hired, and maybe they have since that point, seen their income increase, and maybe they're no longer a resident. If they fit that criteria at the point that they were hired, and that hiring date is November 30th, 2020, or more recently, then you would be able to count that worker not only as a Section 3 worker, but also as a targeted Section 3 worker. So I think about, with the workforce that you have, that sort of who might qualify in this look back period, and that will help you in identifying, okay, we have some workers that are accruing hours that will count towards these benchmarks. And I mean, frankly, PHAs have a harder time with this rule, because you have no threshold. For the HCD funds, it's only counted towards certain types of activities, and you don't really have those sort of carve outs. So you do have, in my mind, a harder task here. There was a question about Davis-Bacon, and kind of a follow-up on this, about You know, Davis-Bacon only comes into effect in jobs that are over $2,000. Do we need to ask contractors with smaller jobs to provide labor hours? So you do need to, not really as part of a Davis-Bacon compliance, but you are going to, because of your reporting requirements on these, on the use of the PHA funds, you know you're going to have to collect total project hours, and then identify Section 3 and targeted Section 3 workers that qualify and track their labor hours. So in the absence of being able to use some kind of reporting that you're collecting from Davis-Bacon certified payrolls, yeah, you're going to have to put something in place that contractor will be responsible for providing you the information that's needed. And we've talked in some of our office hours and trainings. I would not want to wait till the end of the fiscal year and then turn to folks and say, hey, we're going to need this information. They need to understand that up front so that they're actually collecting that information and are ready to provide it to you. And I think that's one of the challenges, is getting that word out, particularly with new requirements, kind of bringing everybody up to speed on what their roles and responsibilities are going to be.
Great, thank you. Somebody was asking if the guidebook is available as a PDF, and unfortunately, no, it's just an e-guidebook. I'm also old school. I like to be able to print that PDF version out as well, but they did decide to have it be more sustainable and have it as an e-guidebook. So you're gonna have to cozy up with your computer on your bed at night and read that. Somebody else was asking, how can I find these slides? When you go to the HUD Exchange, there's a Section 3 page. You can either Google it from that, or you can, when you get to the HUD Exchange, you can go under Programs, and I always check the S, and then there's a long line. You can get to Section 3. When you get to the Section 3 page, at the very bottom is Featured Resources and Trainings, and there's a guy with the construction hat on the far right. It says Section 3 training. There's two different choices there, and you want to hit the final rule training. And when you click on final rule, it'll go to one of the recorded sessions that we had. We did the 25 sessions. We recorded what we thought was one of the best ones. And there it'll take you to that recording, but also has the transcripts. It has a copy of all the 3 days of slides, the tools, all that information is there. So get to the HUD Exchange, search for Section 3, and then you can get it right off of that Section 3 page. It is called the Section 3 Final Rule Training.
And Medora has a couple folks in the queue.
Oh, perfect.
So Medora, do you want to give us the next person?
Yep. First up, we've got Larry McLean. Larry, I am about to unmute you. All right, Larry.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I get the feeling we're way behind the curve. Our fiscal year was starts 7/1, so I think we are obligated to report 60 days after June 30th. The problem, and several staff members sat in on the training last fall, and we left the training with the impression, with the understanding not to change your policies yet, because HUD hasn't issued their final PIH notice related to housing authority compliance. So literally we did not change policies. We've been kind of in this holding pattern, waiting and checking and seeing if HUD's issued their final PIH notice. But sounds like that was a huge mistake or a huge misunderstanding on our part.
So our understanding, the way the notices that have come out have really just clarified what the rule says. I don't believe it's going to change anything that's in the rule. It'll make it simpler and easy for you just to know what you have to do as a PHA, so you don't have to go through all the stuff that's for the HCD financial assistance. It might talk a little more about reporting, maybe give you a little more information if you're a small PHA, but you should be implementing these new requirements now. So yes, please go ahead and start to change your policies, because we want to be looking at labor hours rather than new hires. Any type of assistance that you're doing right now, funded with those different PHA funding, will trigger it. There's no dollar amounts that you have to trigger. It's any dollar in for public housing. Section 3 now applies. So you do want to try to start to run a little faster and try to catch up. But you're right. I mean, you're reporting, if you said you just started your fiscal year, if it started in July of 2021, then your reporting will be due in August of this year, 2022. So if your reporting period ends on 6/30/2022, you're going to need to start to report in August of 2022. Les, do you have any suggestions on how they can start collecting some of those hours? Maybe do some estimates or look at payroll?
No, I mean, I would just first say, I think everybody is kind of behind on this, whether you're a PHA recipient or not. Since we all kind of recognize at the point you get the new set of rules, it takes a while to then incorporate that into your process. So I think the best you can do on this is to try to figure out, okay, so where's my liability that I'm going to need to report on? Try to look at the workforce involved and identify who would qualify as a Section 3 or targeted worker. In the materials, the training materials that are posted, there were sample forms. If you were, I think part of the discussion that we've talked about with folks was, okay, so, when we look at, how do you qualify a Section 3 worker? Some of that could be done as a self-certification that workers would fill out. In other cases, it could be done by the employer. So whether that's you or whether that's a contractor. So I think trying to figure out, what's going to be the simplest way to do this. My thought is on a lot of these, it would be the employer being able to certify based on what that employee's rate was to be able to identify qualifying workers. If you've got firms that you are working with, trying to figure out, do they actually qualify as a Section 3 business concern? If they do, then that's really simplified because we're going to make the presumption that all of their workers are qualifying. I'd be trying to figure out, is there youth build in your area? If there isn't, then that's kind of off the table also. So kind of identifying what's my method on this need to be, and then who am I going to? Is it internal? Is it external? Just try to collect that information. I would have to assume that this first round of reporting, there may be some spotty results on that, because I think everybody is struggling just as you are.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I found the slide of which assistance for public housing does trigger Section 3. So development assistance, operating funds, capital funds, all mixed finance development, and then these other programs, RAD, Jobs Plus, FSS, Ross, those types of things.
And maybe as quickly as possible, trying to implement the qualitative efforts, since that's your backup, to be able to say, okay, well, I'm not so sure about meeting the benchmarks, but we have implemented qualitative efforts, and be able to attest to that would put you in the safe harbor on compliance on this.
Great. Yeah, great ideas, Les. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the suggestions.
Sure. Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't.
Okay. Thank you. Medora, do we have anyone else in the queue?
Yep, we've got a few more in the queue. The next up is, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, excuse me, Shauna Collins. Shauna, I'm about to unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Good job on my name. It's spelled funny, so I'm amazed. So my question is about the Section 3 business concern. I want to make sure I understand it correctly. So if a company or organization qualifies as a Section 3 business concern, then does that make all the employees that labor hours qualify as a Section 3 worker?
Yes, and let's see.
Get to my slide.
I was trying to see where that is.
And then it qualifies them all as a targeted Section 3.
31, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Yeah,
go
when you
ahead.
look at the targeted Section 3 definition here,
Right here.
employed by a Section 3 business concern, we automatically are able to count all those employees. And the same thing when we look at Section 3 workers, if they're employed by a Section 3 business concern, we automatically presume them, or are able to accept them as being a Section 3 worker, whether they are low or very low income. So that's, I mean, the beauty is if you can identify a firm as a Section 3 business concern, that makes things really easy. We simply need total labor hours from that business concern, and we're going to count all of those towards both our benchmark categories.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I was doing that right. Now, here's my question. Unfortunately, we're a public housing authority that has 250 units. We're actually going to work on losing one just because of this policy. Because I don't want to I don't have the staffing to manage all this labor hours, although we're doing it right now. My question is though, I have more than 75% of my employee labor hours as Section 3 qualified. So they meet
Great.
thresholds. So then does that mean I can count everyone in my organization's labor hours, including myself as the director, because I actually would qualify as a Section 3 business concern?
And Chris, I'll see what you think, but I'm not sure whether the PHA itself can be qualified as a Section 3 business concern or not.
Yeah,
I don't know that it says anywhere that you can't.
Right. That might be something we want to clarify. I think because you're a funding recipient directly from HUD, that you cannot be considered the Section 3 business.
What's the question, Chris? I think I know the answer.
Oh, that'd be great, Tiara. She wants to know if her PHA can be considered a Section 3 business concern because more than 75% of the labor hours are performed by Section 3 workers.
The answer is no. Also, nonprofits as well cannot be Section 3 business concerns.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
That would have been wonderful.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Although I still have a large percentage of hours that I can count because
Yeah, absolutely.
Of that. And then I have one other question since I have you guys on
Sure,
here.
Go ahead.
Which has to do with service. I call them service labor hours. So my garbage person, do I have to track them, the company that's dumping my garbage at our complex?
Yes.
I do.
If you're paying for them out of those different funding sources that we showed, then the answer to that is yes.
Well, all of our funding sources come out of operating or capital funds, one or the other. So here's my other question. If they're non-compliant, and I have no choice, this is the only garbage service in the next 2 counties of our area. If they're non-compliant with providing me that information, can I track their hours on site and just count it as non-Section 3 since I have no other documentation?
Tiara, have you heard about this at all? I know you can do good faith estimates, but I was thinking the good faith estimate comes from the garbage company.
What's your question? Sorry.
No, that's okay. She was asking, she said they have a garbage company, and so we have to count the hours, but they're being non-compliant. They're not handing over the hours. Is there a way that she can just track those on her own and not count them as Section 3, but just count the hours?
That would be hard to do if you're not, if you don't have that information from the sub. Les, you look like you're gonna jump
Well,
in.
I'm thinking that at that point, because you have two ways of meeting safe harbor on this. One is meeting those benchmarks, but the backup plan here is on those qualitative reporting. So I think since you're already, everybody's going to want to be doing the qualitative reporting along with trying to track these benchmarks. That may be your, if we've got somebody that's not cooperating, that's the best you can do on that. But your backup's going to be that you are doing appropriate outreach when you have the opportunity, and you're going to be able to report that, and that will kind of save the day for you on compliance.
Unless I want to add too,
Go
and
ahead.
you might be going there with it too, but just so that, you want to how you can collect hours or you pay the sub or the contractor too. So you may want to think through like a system.
Yeah, but if I don't pay them, I don't have a garbage
collection be. Right. So I guess what I'm saying is if you can think through a process that works for you and your organization where you have them report before you basically pay the invoice, or have them
you don't
submit their hours at the time they submit your invoice.
You don't understand.
Their invoice.
There is no other garbage service in the next 3 counties. So I have no service if I ruffle their feathers.
So I think you make your best effort on that. I will say, I think this is going to be true on, no matter whether it's a contractor doing some major project or whether it's, a service contract. I think the better job that we can do up front about, okay, here's what we need, and it doesn't have to be that complicated, will help people like, kind of wanting to throw up their hands and say, I'm not doing that. So I think the better our messaging is on the front end on this. And that's why when I was talking about, having a conversation with, let's say, I use the example of a contractor. If, let's say it's a Davis-Bacon project, if they actually could simply, based on their payroll, be able to identify who qualifies as a target or as a Section 3 worker, that's a lot simpler, I would think, than going to individual workers with a self-declaration form and trying to explain what's going on with that and collecting those. And so I think the earlier we can try to have those conversations and kind of back them away from the ledge a little bit, maybe we'll have a better chance on getting participation. But I think you're clearly right that you need garbage collection service. If they're not going to be cooperative, you're making your best effort, and then your backup plan is, if we don't hit the benchmarks because we don't have reporting from them, okay, because we're doing the qualitative efforts, and that's going to keep us okay.
And I would also, I was typing an answer, so if you already said this, I apologize for repeating it. I think HUD also likes to look for efforts. So if you have documentation that you requested this information and you didn't get it, at least you have due diligence that you tried to do that, and then you went to plan B of doing qualitative efforts. Shauna, any other questions?
No, that's good.
Okay. Sorry, it may not be what you wanted to hear.
Well, I just think that, fairness to me would be just, we're going to be fine with having enough Section 3 and targeted Section 3 companies that we deal with. So then all I need to do is track the hours that they're providing this service and just not qualify them as Section 3. I just can't get those hours from them directly. I'll easily meet my benchmarks.
Good.
It's the problem is you have these services such as like garbage service, you know, where it's non-competitive, and my thought process is fair would be for us to count it as just non-Section 3.
Well, I mean, essentially, you're going to be doing that because you're only able to count the ones that you can collect documentation on. But I think Chris's point about having a notation that you made efforts and you have some non-cooperative folks just shows that you tried to follow your protocol.
And that you were aware of what the requirements were. You
Yeah.
didn't just ignore them.
Yeah.
Because again, it's best efforts. We're trying to do our best efforts to reach this. Les, I also just put up the slide for what a Section 3 business concern was, because Shauna's really knowledgeable. She knows what that is, but there might have been a few people that were, what are we even talking about, a Section 3 business concern? So this was a new definition with a new rule where we now have these Section 3 businesses, and it can be one of these 3 criteria. The Section 3 business can self-certify what this is. And so they would say that, maybe 51% or more is owned and controlled by low or very low income persons, or 75% of labor hours for the business over the last 3 months were performed by Section 3 workers, or 51% or more was owned and controlled by current residents of public housing or Section 8 housing assistance. If they're able to identify one of those 3 things, then they could be considered a Section 3 business. And like we were talking early on, if you have a Section 3 business, you score because your Section 3 business, anyone who's employed by a Section 3 business concern automatically is a Section 3 worker, and then is automatically a targeted Section 3 worker. So that's kind of like a bonus points for you in your organization if you're able to identify some Section 3 business concerns who are working as part of your projects and your initiatives. Medora, is there any other people that are waiting in the queue to ask us a question?
Yep, we've got a few more. The next up, and again, I'm sorry about pronunciations. The next we have is Scarlett. I am going to be unmuting you now. All right, you have been unmuted.
Scarlett, can you hear us?
Scarlett, I will connect with you in the chat box. I think you might be having some issues regarding your microphone, and that's fine. We have another individual who can be unmuted, and this is Adele. Adele, I am going to unmute you now.
Okay. Yes, this question has a lot to do with community development as well as PHA, but if a project, like a construction project, gets assigned well following the November 30th, 2020 date where the funds were awarded, doesn't that project still fall under the old rule? For example, there may be a big MOA that talks about development of housing or something like that, and that project was committed, that project's funds were committed, and it was executed well before the November the 30th, 2020 date, like maybe in 2019 or something like that. And then later, they determined what they were going to do with that money, and built up the construction projects. Those individual construction projects still fall under the old rule, and Section 3 will need to be continue to be collected, but they will not have to be reported in the DRGR system as new rule hours. Is that right?
Well, Chris, I don't know. I'm a little hesitant about this in that, so Chris has up on the screen our definition under legacy projects.
Mhm.
And PHAs kind of play out a little bit differently to some extent on this. So this is based on the contract being executed or when funds are committed. So when you talk about the commitment was approved for this well before November 30th, 2020, did that create a funding source that then individual projects would later be identified and contracts executed for those individual projects?
Yes.
So I would tend to think that because we're looking at when that contract is executed for a project, I would tend to think that this is going to be based on, if you then decided, okay, out of that funds that were committed before this point, now we've identified that we're going to do a project on Main Street and it's, I don't know, it's 6 units or something, that the date that the contract is signed for that particular project would then be the date that we're going to look at to see, is this under the old rule or did that commitment happen on or after November 30th, 2020? To me, it seems a little under the HCD funding, the non-PHA, it's a little bit cleaner because you have, when we look about what's triggering, it's operating funds, capital funds, which I'm not sure are project specific. So Chris or Tierra, you want to add into this? I'm thinking they may need to ask under the PHA program for a clarification or a call on this just to make sure they're in the safe harbor on that.
Tierra, I know you were talking with HUD a little bit about commitment and dates on that.
Sorry, y'all. I was knee deep in typing the answer.
No, it's okay. So we have
Which is why I didn't fully hear the first.
yeah, go ahead, Les. You want to summarize?
So I think, as I understand this, there's a commitment of funds overall, but then individual, and that happened prior to November 30th. But individual projects were identified and contracts signed for those individual projects after November 30th. And so on the PHA side of things, are we looking at when, like a capital fund was committed, or when an individual project that's going to be funded out of that, actually we commit funds to that particular undertaking?
So what I do know is that commitment is defined by each program office. So my recommendation would be, since there's no guidance yet that has been issued by PAH, is to refer to your HUD rep to help them, basically to get them to help you determine what commitment means under PIH until guidance is issued.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises on this one.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Did you have any other questions, Adele?
Oh, just that was a gray area.
Yeah.
And I wanted some more specific guidance because it's hard to determine what needs to be reported in DRGR, hours, or if they just collect the documentation. But I'll refer to the HUD rep.
Sorry that we left you just as gray as it began.
That's fine, thank you.
And DRGR is for the HCD assistance. The public housing is going to be reported in a new system that is yet to be unveiled, but coming soon. Medora, were you able to get Scarlett back, or?
Not just yet. So I've requested that Scarlett writes her question into the chat and I can read it once I have that. In the meantime, I can unmute Sandra Littles.
Okay.
Sandra, I am going to unmute you now.
Hello, everyone. So all of this is a great area for me. I'm new to the role, and we have a very large housing authority. So we have a very large Section 3 program. So I just want to be clear, qualitative efforts, did that take the place of other economic opportunities? Meaning, if you are not able to hire, you can provide some type of training, you can provide, or you can donate 3% of your actual contract monies to the Section 3 fund. Did that take the place of that?
I think some of that guidance is probably PHA specific on the old ways on this. So what Chris is showing on the screen is what will, we believe, pop up when you are reporting in the new PHA portal on qualitative reporting activities. And that comes directly out of the regulations. I think that's at 7515B. And so it's a list of, outreach for job applicants or trying to engage Section 3 businesses using the Section 3, the opportunity portal. So kind of a similar way that in the absence of having jobs or training opportunities that you could count to meet sort of the numerical goals, that you still have a way to be in compliance, which is how the old rule was laid out. And I think your examples fit under that and probably were guidance specific to PHAs that folks were using. So our understanding is that what's populated in the system when you're reporting will be these categories that come out of the regs, but then there's an other category. So you could be marking other on this, and then within your files have backup documentation, which would show what were my outreach efforts that I'm counting under this other. But the system will essentially first look at the quantitative, and then if you've not met the benchmarks based on that, then it's our understanding that then you will get this pop-up screen on the qualitative reporting and simply indicate which of these categories you're undertaking. And then presumably when there is Section 3 monitoring being done, so the system would say, okay, it appears based on what you reported, you're in compliance. I would assume with Section 3 monitoring, then they'll be looking at, okay, so you said you did qualitative efforts of whatever, and that they would perhaps look in your file to see, I want to see more about what you did.
Okay.
Chris, anything you want to add on that?
No, I think that was good. Sandra, other questions?
And yes, for the labor hours, my physical year started in October 31st.
Okay.
So can you explain how that reporting will work? So from what is the 90-day thing? Yeah.
So your report will be due 60 days after your fiscal year ends. So if you started 10/1 of 21 and your reporting period ends 9/30/22, then 60 days after that, what is that? Does that get us to November? Is when your report will be due. Or your reporting in the system will be due. There's going to be a new system that's supposed to be unveiled that I heard is coming soon. And that's what you'll report in that new system.
Okay.
But it sounds like you're doing the right things. You're collecting hours. You're keeping track of qualitative efforts. I mean, that's all you can do right now is just keep track of it, and then when it's reporting time, you'll be able to go into that system. I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of training or webinars to show everybody how to do that. I know the office that oversees Section 3 has been very dedicated to trying to get all this information out. I mean, they had did 25 trainings. The last time I heard an office that did 25 trainings was when the new lead rule came out in 2000. So, I mean, they're very dedicated to trying to get the grantees to understand what these rules are. And so I'm assuming there'll be some good information that comes out when the reporting system's available.
And Sandra, it looks like you may have been the person that asked earlier about getting copy of the training materials emailed. As Chris mentioned, on the HUD Exchange, there is a Section 3 landing page, and the Section 3 trainings have been posted a recording, and I think the training materials would be available there also. And so you can get those there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you
And
guys so much.
sure. And if for some reason you haven't been able to get to a training, there are going to be 3 different offerings of it available starting in May. So you can register. If you already went to it, it's the exact same thing. But if you haven't, it's going to be available live as a webinar. You'll get to see Les again. He'll be one of your trainers for 3 different sessions being available in May, starting in May and then one in June.
Okay. I haven't gotten to a training, but I will definitely sign up for one.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Medora, who else do we have?
All right, I've got a few that I can read out. The first one is from Scarlett. So Scarlett said that most of the questions have been answered already, but the final question is related to any best practices or areas of opportunity that we should take under consideration for MTW agencies. For example, work performed by resident services or other departments funded through block grants indirectly advance Section 3 efforts. What is the best way to align these efforts?
Well, Chris, I was hoping you were just about to jump in on that one. I'm not sure I'm capturing every part of this, but I just want to clarify. So it sounds like some of what you're talking about are things that are being paid for by something other than the sort of short list of triggering funds on this. So we had operating assistance, capital funds. So I don't know where that slide is in short order here. I think it's on day 1, slide 44.
There we go.
Yeah. So you're reporting for Section 3. Section 3 is going to apply to this list. So if the things that you were talking about, these sort of other efforts that you're wanting to be able to kind of capture in this, if they're not triggering Section 3, you don't have to report on those, but I'm thinking that under the qualitative efforts, it may be that that's actually qualifying as part of a qualitative effort that you're completing. And so that might be as part of what you're reporting on those. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to flip around to my version of this. So qualitative efforts are on day 3 on slide 45, I think. Yeah, so here's our regulatory reference at the bottom of the slide on qualitative efforts, and they really fall into 3 categories: on doing direct outreach, trying to link and identify Section 3 business concerns or workers and linking them with potential opportunities. But then some things could be done under capacity building, where you are assisting either businesses or workers to be better prepared to be able to take advantage of any opportunities. And then this last category under connect is essentially having systems in place which link workers or businesses to opportunities. So I think anything that you are doing that sort of supports your the Section 3 efforts can be probably reported under one of these categories under the qualitative reporting. You know, you're really in the portal just clicking a box, but then you would have documentation within your file of, hey, these are the other efforts that we have going on. That's our, you know, our basis for marking off this box on qualitative reporting activities.
Yeah, and then if for some reason you were talking about other block grants that were not public housing, today we really are only focusing on public housing. So it's not that Les and I want to ignore people's questions about HCD assistance. You just had 5 other opportunities to come to office hours about that. So we're trying to really focus on our public housing compatriots today. But if you have these other funding sources, that does trigger Section 3 if more than $200,000 is put in per a project. So HCD assistance is on a project basis, but public housing is for a full fiscal year. And anytime there's a dollar amount that's put in using development assistance, operating funds, capital funds, any type of mixed funding. And somebody said, what is mixed funding? Well, mixed funding would be using operating funds and maybe CDBG. That's a mixed funding. Or other programs like RAD, Jobs Plus, Ross, Choice in Neighborhoods, other similar programs like that. That's where the public housing, any dollar amount, no threshold whatsoever, any dollar amount automatically triggers Section 3. I guess that was one that we read. Medora, is there any other people waiting in the queue?
Yes, I've got 2 more in the queue. One quick one for verbal readout is, for labor unions, if a worker has a base wage but receives different wages per project for PHA, which wage would we base their income on, their base wage or wage on that project?
So I'll jump in and then Chris, you can help as needed. So for projects that are triggering Section 3, we're collecting information about total labor hours and then identifying workers in that project that are qualifying as Section 3 and targeted. So it would be based on what they're actually being paid for that particular project. So, you know, they may be working for the contractor and they're on some jobs that are not triggering Davis-Bacon, or they might be you know, operating heavy equipment on one job and simply being a I don't know, you know, manual labor on another. So having different pay rates based on what they're actually doing. So when we're looking at Section 3, we're looking at for that particular project. And so if it's a Section 3 project and it is Davis-Bacon, we would look at the certified payrolls to be able to verify what are they actually being paid for this particular triggering project.
I think that's pretty thorough, Les. Medora, what other questions do you have?
All right, the next one is from Claudia, and Claudia would like to be unmuted. So Claudia, I am going to unmute you now. All right, Claudia, you have been unmuted.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone. My question was in regards to the reporting. As I understand, as we're waiting for guidance from HUD on reporting pertaining to the new rule change, where in particular in your MTW agency, who is assigned or responsible to compile the reporting of the new Section 3 rule change for reporting purposes for the agency? As we know, based on the presentation presented today, we understand that the Section 3 touches just about every part of the agency. So my question is, who in your agency is responsible or assigned the designee to compile this information for reporting?
I think that's something you're going to have to define. In some agencies, you may have, sort of different program tracks, and so you may have a couple of different folks that are assigned on this, or it's all being reported to one person that's been designated in your agency to be handling this. So I think that's part of, if you, on the training that was done, that's posted, we talked about recommending that you have a Section 3 plan, which really was kind of laying out your policies and procedures and thinking about, okay, within my agency, how am I going to implement this? Who is going to be responsible for this? How do we collect the information? Do we have go-to folks who have been tasked with getting up to speed on this? And, do we have standard forms and processes and those sorts of things? So I think that's really, it's a planning process that I think every agency is going to need to do to some extent, and it may look different from one agency to another.
Thank you.
And I will mention that there was a question about, who's monitoring this. Section 3 has really been kind of rolled into programs rather than sort of as a standalone. So I also think, much like HUD has done with this, I think when you think about who's going to be responsible for this, how's this going to work, I would be looking at, how am I set up now? Where do I have capacity and sort of opportunity to be able to collecting what I need, and probably figure out how to integrate this into, rather than kind of reinventing the wheel if possible.
Thank you.
Sure. So Les, somebody was asking about the documentation. I'm trying to remember which slide that was on so we could pull that up, where it has like, you can collect one of these 5 different things for the targeted worker. Was that day 1?
I believe, yeah. So I think it's like slide 30 and 31 maybe on day 1.
Again, no, maybe it's day 2.
Oh, maybe it is.
Sorry, everybody. We have 3 different days of slides. It's a lot of great information, but it's a lot of information.
And we've got a sort of a cheat sheet that we're trying to use to get us to the right
slide number.
spot.
Yes, here it is. I found it.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Section 3 workers, there's one of these needs to be maintained. So you need to figure out which one's going to work best in your situation, whether someone's low income or they're living in a PHA. Depends on what type of circumstance you're trying to qualify that Section 3 worker as to what type of information needs to be maintained. So you could have a worker's self-certification that they're low income. You could have a worker's self-certification that they're participating in living in public housing, or have Section 8. You could get a certification from the PHA, or if they're receiving TBRA, that they're receiving that. You could have an employer certification that the worker's income is below an income level, the low income level, that's HUD's income level at or below 80%. And again, it's based on the individual household. We're not looking at family size, we're looking at individual, or an employer certification that they are employed by a Section 3 business concern. So that's Section 3. And then our next slide here, you want to look on this left side for public housing assistance for targeted Section 3. Again, what would that documentation be? It's one of these things depending on how you're trying to qualify them. So a worker self-certification or certification from a PHA, employer certification, or a worker certification that they're part of a youth build program. So again, it depends on what type of category you're qualifying them as to what the documentation would be. But if you attended the training, this is day 2, slides 36 and 37 is where you can go to try to find more information about that.
And I think I was kind of recommending earlier when looking at this list, some of these might be easier and quicker than others. So, you know, if you, based on you being the PHA, being able to verify that they live in public housing, or they're receiving Section 8 assistance, so you know that by definition they're income eligible, that may be the easiest thing to do to certify a list rather than going to individual workers. Same sort of thing if the employer is able to identify and certify based on what they're paying workers, which workers are going to qualify. And then we talked about, you know, if you can identify that you have a Section 3 business concern, that's sort of like the magic bullet for both Section 3 and also for targeted Section 3 workers. So go for the easiest thing first. There are sample forms as part of the materials for the training, including, you know, forms that could be customized for your use. Similarly, for Section 3 business concerns, there's a form on that. So I think, you know, coming up with your methodologies and some standard forms will be really helpful to make sure that you've captured that documentation as quickly and easily as possible.
Yeah, and all of these forms were available at the training. They are available now on the HUD Exchange. You go to hudexchange.info, you click on the Section 3 program page, and these are what we're calling tools. So you can get to this by clicking on tools. You can get to this by going to the rule training, because we have them identified there. We have them in multiple places, so hopefully it'll be easy for you to access them. If you attended the training, they would have been emailed to you a link to be able to access them, and you had to download them within a couple days of attending that session. So they are available now on the HUD Exchange for you to access. HUD does not prescribe how you need to document. They just say it has to be one of these types of things. And so providing these samples to you, you can adopt them, you can play with them, make it, you know, fix them to how they work for your organization. So, Les, that does bring us to a little after 3. I know people have lots of questions, but we don't have any planned right now, but I'm assuming we'll most likely do more of these after the next 3 sessions of the PHA training.
And my sense is that there are lots of folks that haven't had the opportunity to take the training. I think it'll really help you. So I would recommend that you or somebody that's going to be working closely with this look at signing up for the training that's coming up, because I think that will help folks.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us today. We may not have gotten to everybody's questions, but we will definitely take those and see if there's anything that we can add to the FAQs. Thank you to Les and to Tiara and to Medora today for everybody's support, and hope you have a great rest of your day. So thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.